How are you guys doing? Everybody all right?
Okay, we are now live streaming.
Yes, you are. Okay.
Now, are you recording?
I'm
Seth?
recording. It's being recorded
Okay.
to SBS Live and a few other places.
Okay, so we are now real. It's time to begin.
I'm just gonna, just stop my video. You guys can. I'll be in the background here.
Okay, thank you so much for your help. Okay, and Richard is here in spirit. Okay, good afternoon. I'm hoping we will grow, but if not, it will be a nice conversation among the three of us. I think we should start with our bracha and plow along with the conversation, not knowing if other people will be joining us. So we start by thanking God for the obligation to make Torah study our occupation. Baruch atah Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, now we are beginning this week the Parsha, the entire book of the Midbar, the fourth book of Torah. And before we get into the conversation about the Parsha, I just wanted to give you a very brief overview. If each of the books of Torah has a kind of identifying work name, like the book of Genesis is beginnings and the book of Exodus is nation formation, this is the book of contention, of rebellion, of pushing the envelope, of trying to figure out, we got these laws on Sinai. What does that really mean on the ground? How do we understand them? How do we put them into action? And it is not only the book of rebellion such as Korach and give us meat or we'll die. It's also the positive sense of the daughters of Tzlafchad, who saw that they would lose their inheritance when we entered the land and said, this isn't right, and challenged Moses. And God said, they have a point. So there's lots of questioning and pushing going on in this book. Ultimately, it's the trek across the desert and the molding of a people. Who were they and what would they become? The beginning Parsha suggests a series of questions. Siggy. He's coming in. I'm not sure. Okay. Hi, Ziggy. Oh, okay. Well, we will hear him when he is here. There are several questions that are prompted by this reading, and we're going to look at them individually as we proceed. First of all, what does the word wilderness mean? And not just a dictionary definition, but what's the affect to you? Hi, Ziggy, here you are. And how does it feel to hear that word? Why was the Torah given in the desert, in the wilderness? I've had Hebrew school kids ask me that. Why wasn't it in Egypt? Or why not when we enter the land? And how might we understand the notion of wilderness metaphorically? Before we start looking at the text, I want to share some words with you. You may know what these words mean. You may have heard them before, but I wanted to make sure we all understood them in the context of this presentation. The first one is hefker. Hefker essentially means ownerless. When I was at the seminary, as the year would end and people were graduating, they would take furniture that they had brought with them out of their rooms and put them in the hallway because they weren't shopping them to their first job. And they would put a sign on the furniture saying hefker, which meant you want it, you can have it. Okay, so hefker is ownerless. Hefkerut is ownerlessness. Liminality, liminal moments. It's been described as threshold moments, moments when you go from one status to another. The moment under the chuppah where the groom breaks the glass, That's the liminal moment. Not necessarily when he gives her a ring, not necessarily the ketubah. That breaking of the glass is a ritual breaking of the tension, and they go from being two individuals to a married couple. If you've been to a Brit Milah, you can sense the tension ease after the Moel has completed the circumcision. Lahabdil, the first sound of thud of soil on a casket breaks the tension. You can see that the people around the grave feel different and look different after that than before. Homeostasis. Homeostasis is a sense of being in balance. And it can be kind of a power word, a denotation. We are in a state of homeostaticity, or it can be a critical word. When I learned the word, it came out of a book by Dr. Edwin Friedman, Generation to Generation, which is a book on family therapy within the context of religious congregations. And his advice was, if you go to a congregation and interview for the pulpit, and they say everything is just fine here, they're describing homeostasis, but everything is probably not fine, because that people don't grow, people don't move when everything is just fine. There needs to be a little bit of imbalance to force people to think, which direction do I need to go? That's true in individual lives, it's true in communities as well. Okay, end of vocabulary lesson. Now, we're going to see if I can make this work. And there we are. Can we all see this? Yes? No?
Yes.
Okay, good. Wandering in the desert. Okay, so the word Bamidbar, it bothered me that the word seemed to have the word davar in it, meaning a word or a thing, or the root of to say, ani medaberet. So what does the word mean? I found this online, and I can't judge the authenticity, but it makes a lot of sense. The noun midbar means wilderness. Okay, we know that. It literally means a place or agent of wording. I really love that. In the sense that wording means coming into being. A midbar is an ecosystem where entities exist in a larger system, just like words exist in speech. It does not denote a specific kind of terrain, and is certainly not reserved for deserts. It may very well denote lush stretches that are good for grazing, which I did not realize. Okay, and there are citations. Just like a land is not typically without people, so is a midbar not typically without people. Okay, this is why the midbar may even hold towns and peoples. A wilderness is the opposite of a refined culture, with its specific jargon and well-defined social codes. When Israel left Egypt and commenced the 40-year trek through the Midbar, Israel abandoned all the advantages of a formal culture and started all over with the basic rudiments of being human, to slowly build up a social identity of its own. Remember, they went and complained they didn't have food, they didn't have all these wonderful comforts of Egypt that they kind of remembered. But they had left all that behind for good or for evil. Most cities with their luxuries and leisure get in the way of someone who truly seeks the skinny of existence. That's why anybody serious abandons all established wisdoms and spends a stint in the wilderness first. So this writer says a wilderness is the opposite of a refined culture with its specific jargon and well-defined social codes. Now I ask, does this sound counterintuitive? It's not that that dichotomy is counterintuitive. It's that it feels as though, in our point of view, 21st century, an organized society is to be desired. Am I right? Am I wrong?
Yep.
Okay. And the wilderness is the opposite. Okay. But the implication here, and actually they come right out and say it, must abandon all established wisdom and spend a stint in the wilderness first. How do we today envision an entire world? Do we envision it refined, or do we envision it wild? Not what we see when we open the newspaper. What do we envision? What's the ideal world?
Well, we really didn't define refined, did we?
I'm sorry?
We really didn't define refined. What does refined mean? It's so subjective.
Okay, how would you define it?
Well, refined, first thing that comes to mind is, we're highly intelligent and educated. That's what it comes to mind when we say refined, but that's my paradigm. I don't know necessarily that that's the right paradigm.
I don't know if there's one right one. I don't know what the writer had in mind when he used that word, or she. Refined, well, also means purified. And purified, I'm just playing this out. Purified implies nothing rough, nothing, no bumps in the road. A refined culture is a culture that is smooth to navigate, perhaps. Everybody knows their place. It's predictable. If I say something that you disagree with, just jump in. As opposed to wild, which means anything goes.
Oh, the world is neither. The world is the world either, and it's both.
Okay.
So when you say, what is my ideal? Well, the ideal is to work toward a pure world. When the Mashiach comes and everybody puts down the swords and everybody's believing in one God and all that, but we're not there. But there are some who are. I mean, some who claim to be, and but if we're talking about the world, every day is proof that we're neither refined, and there is a lot of wilderness out there. So that's my approach.
Yes, you're right. Now you are describing what you see when you look out your window. You're looking at a world that has a lot of wilderness, but also has pockets of refinement in it. I think the question is, and I think you answered it, how do we envision an ideal world? And your understanding is when we put down our swords, when we love each other, when we worship one God, and when we learn to accept one another as people. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, just want to be sure. So what does the word wilderness mean? You have to go back to that. What does it mean to be in the wilderness? For our Israelite ancestors, the wilderness, before we do this, tell me what you hear when you hear the word wilderness. Does it make you comfortable? Does it make you uncomfortable? What's your read of that word? Nobody has a.
To me, wilderness means it's not been. Well, I don't want to use the word civilized, but where the human beings have not done their damage to nature. To me, that's wilderness.
Okay, so it's not an uncomfortable concept.
No.
Okay.
I think of wilderness as almost a little bit like scary, though.
Okay, because
to me, wilderness is unknown. It's a place where there's not civilization, there's not, I think of like, when I think about going to the wilderness, it's like, oh my God, I better have everything with me that I need, because it's not going to be there for me to pick up if I've forgotten it, that kind of thing.
Okay. And that I would have expected to be the general response to the word wilderness, that it's not a fun place. But it can also be a place, I think, as Al said, that's pure, that's untouched by the damaging effects of humanity. Does it help to think of our lives individually or communally as a wilderness? Maybe not help. What does it make a difference if we think of our lives either individually or communally? Oh, Jill?
I want to just clarify that wilderness to me is not just the scary part, because I go out in the wilderness on purpose, right? I mean, I go there for the peace and the quiet and the part that it's uncivilized, and that there's it's not like so I think there's both parts to that word, if that's what we're defining.
Okay. Hold on to that notion that we go out into the wilderness by choice. Just hold on to that, because we're going to look at it a little bit differently in a little while. But what did I just do here? I should tell you, this is my first trip through PowerPoint, so I may do strange things. Bear with me, please. But when we think, let's think of it. Make the move. It's a little early, but make the move to metaphoric understanding. What does it do for us if we think of our lives as a wilderness?
Well, we all start with nothing when we're born. We don't know anything. We don't know what the future's like. We need a lot of life's lessons plus teachers and everything else in order to refine us from the state of birth until we develop into the human beings that we eventually become. So if we parallel this to the birth of a nation, that they've not known of these laws, they don't know what's ahead of them. They've heard some promises that they're very skeptical about, and they want to believe because they've seen some unbelievable miracles and things happening. That's not enough. It's not enough for them because they're still nascent. They're still just developing. Everything is brand new.
Right.
So if we do this parallelism, I think we get a feel for what it means to return to the wilderness, to get out of what we're at because there's stuff more to learn, or to quiet our minds from everything. And it's kind of that moment of reflection, or we continue. But it's an individual journey, and in their case, it was the journey of a nation. So
I might dispute something you said, that when we're born, we're not born into wilderness. When we're born into a fairly predictable world. We're hungry, we cry, somebody feeds us. We're uncomfortable, we cry, somebody changes us. We don't understand no yet. 2-month-old baby doesn't really understand no. It's only when we start breaking away from our parents and going out into the world that we start realizing that things aren't always predictable. And it's almost like going from Gan Eden, that idealized past, into this wilderness. And then maybe, I don't know if we ever really come out of it unless we're very, very lucky. Some people live in a wilderness their whole lives, and some people are happy that way. but I don't know if we're born into, I think parents move into a world of wilderness when their babies are born because nothing's predictable for the babies. Okay. Why was Torah given in the wilderness? Could have been given in Egypt as we were packing up to leave. You know, we're all packed up and we're moving out. And just before we cross the river, you know, stop. I have some new words to give you. Or God could have waited till we got to the land, but no. And some of you may have heard this before. Midrash asserts that aside from the logistical benefit of finding a location devoid of people and idolatrous practices so synonymous with Egyptian society, the desert also contributed to an insight regarding the ubiquitous availability of Torah. The rabbis taught the Torah was given by means of within the context of three things. And there are citations in different places of Tanakh related to Torah. Fire, rain, and desert. And specifically for our purposes here, as it says, and God spoke to Moses in the Sinai desert. Why was the Torah given by means of within the context of these three things? Just as these three things can be obtained for free by anyone in the world, so too the words of Torah are free. There's no secret, there's no key, you know, you don't have to know a secret password, which is a good thing. I sit on the Beit Din for conversion, and if Torah were not free to the world, I wouldn't have any work. So, free to the world. Another interpretation for our purposes here. Why was the Torah given in the desert? Anyone who does not make him or herself ownerless, hefker, like the desert, cannot acquire the Torah. Making oneself hefker does not speak as much to the idea of an individual being owned by another, but rather the manner in which one views him or herself. And we're going to look at that a little bit more later. The figurative symbolism of receiving the Torah in the desert appears to parallel a number of other rabbinic themes, stressing humility and self-abnegation. Mount Sinai, for example, upon which God descended and Moses ascended in order to receive the Ten Commandments and the entire corpus of Jewish law, is categorized as the lowest of mountains. The Torah suggests that God orchestrated the Jews going into the desert because the atmosphere created in such desolate and lonely surroundings would be extremely conducive for the entire nation to abandon the example of their previous malevolent flesh and blood masters. Instead, the belittling impact of the desert would inspire them to focus upon serving humbly and selflessly the creator of the universe. So, is this true? Is this how we respond to desolation? Would a walk by the sea, and I was struggling with this notion that it has to be the desert. Would a walk by the sea or through a forest accomplish the same thing?
I think being in the wilderness removes all distractions and it pares us down to our base instincts. Whereas if we have those distinctions, our attention can drift off so easily.
Oh yeah, and that would be true of the seaside and in the forest, that there would be so many distractions.
Yeah.
Okay, the ocean is my happy place, and so I immediately thought, why can't I go take a walk on the beach? But you're right, I would end up looking at the gulls or watch the waves coming in and going out, and
yeah, a happy place is not really conducive to.
I had to think about it though, but. On a trip to Israel a number of years ago, we were taken out into the desert and instructed to go find a place for ourselves, not as a group, but as individuals. And the silence was so complete. which is again something you don't find by the ocean or in the forest.
Mhm.
And we were meant to just be and listen for the voice of God. And I got to tell you, if you don't hear the voice of God in the desert by yourself, your antenna need tweaking, because it's there. And there's no distractions unless there's something crawling on the ground, and there probably wasn't at that point. Just rocks, not even Sahara. This was the Israeli desert, so rocks and really rough, unforgiving terrain, and silent. And okay, Jill, your hand is up.
Yes. Excuse me, I'm listening at the same time that I'm doing all kinds of things, so I didn't put my camera on. Yes,
Oh, hi.
I don't really believe that I personally need to be in the desert and silent to hear God, because for me, God is not necessarily there, or it is there, but I feel God on the ocean like you do on the beach more than I would, I think, in the wilderness. And I feel God more when I'm with sometimes other people. I mean, I was just in Zion and Bryce for the weekend, and the people that were there that assisted us, we had a few different problems that happened, and it was kind of weird, but the angels that helped us, that the people around in this area that were hiking and that were and that assisted me and my sister, that's where I felt God. I felt God not only in the nature, but in the people too. So I don't think I need to be in the wilderness, and I'm not even sure I would feel God in the wilderness. I have done the same thing you did, and it was interesting, but it's not where it was much less about God than what I feel God in other places and other times.
Okay. Yes. Let me distinguish between the search for God in general, because I agree with you. I really believe God is in the relationships. As a very quick aside, I saw Come From Away this week, and I cried through the whole first half of the play, because what I saw was a very small town coming together to embrace people who didn't even speak literally the same language, and feed them and house them and care for them and love them. And I remember thinking, this is the hand of God, bringing these people together, and the love that they showed these people who came from away. God was there, no question. I think there's another search, and hopefully we will get to it before too long. We're halfway through. There's another search in which we may find ourselves that is not necessarily the search for God as God, but a search for a path for ourselves. And I think it was Bob who said, when you're out in the wilderness, everything gets stripped away. The noise is gone, the distractions are gone, and whatever worries you bring with you somehow seem to dissipate, because you are surrounded by such enormity that makes you feel so small. And that's the search that I think we are on at some point in our lives, some of us still. I don't want to say any more because there's more to come. Now, no. Okay, I knew I was going to do that. Okay. Making oneself hefker does not speak as much to the idea of an individual being owned by another, but rather the manner in which one views him or herself. So what does this mean? Why is thinking oneself to be ownerless a requirement for receiving Torah? What does it mean to be owned? What does it mean to be ownerless?
it's hard. It's hard. I would imagine it would be hard for the Israelites in Egypt to think about God when they had such a rough existence. So their primary thought was, how do you survive another day? How do you not get killed building the pyramids or whatever, or have enough food? So kind of it's distracting, very distracting. When you're not owned, when you're free, that gives you a little bit more time to think about other things.
Okay. Okay. I think I've taken you off on a path that is not where I wanted to take you. If we think of ourselves as owning ourselves, and let's get away from the real, the literal meaning of slavery, the building the pyramids and all. What does it mean for us to own ourselves? Without judgment, just what does it mean for us to own ourselves?
To me, it's you're happy with who you are. Obviously, there's always room for improvement, but basically, you're happy with who you are.
We go to the term homeostasis. You're happy with who you are. You're in a place of equilibrium, and all is good. Life is good. Okay. And if you are ownerless,
Are you searching for a new owner? I'm ownerless. I need someone to own me. Torah will provide an ownership of me. I'll accept that. If I'm ownerless, that's something you have to be before you can accept Torah. It sounds a little odd, but if I'm following the rules of business, or I'm a slave to some job, or I'm being controlled by my choices, and my choices have been hard to make and cost me dearly. Do I have to give those up before I can be receptive to receiving the Torah? I'm just throwing more questions out.
But those are good questions, and to be ownerless. Well, yes, to be ownerless might mean that you are not enslaved to something other than your own vision of yourself. Because that's what you talked about. You talked about business, you talked about, all kinds of places where you might feel yourself enslaved, or you have allowed yourself to be enslaved to the clock, to your phone, to whatever. And according to this, you need to disconnect the shackles. You need to allow yourself to be ownerless, and that can be very scary. What does it mean for nobody to own me? On the other hand, I'm wondering if being ownerless implies that we have our own agency, that we can make our own decisions and not be beholden to someone else or some other force or level. But if we think of ourselves as being ownerless, we allow ourselves to think about who's in charge. Well, I'm in charge of me, but I'm not doing a really good job of it. And I thought I was happy, but maybe I'm not. And when you reduce yourself, your ego, you begin to think, how can I connect to something that will provide me with direction so I'm not wandering lost anymore? The Israelites weren't wandering. They had the pillar of smoke and fire. Us, not so much. And I think that's a lot of what we're looking for. Metaphoric. Now we're going to go where we've been this whole conversation. As soon as we find a rhythm for ourselves and start to take the routine for granted, something challenges that routine. We've all been there. And often that challenge can be life-altering. Certainly the last few years have told us that. The shift from our normal routine can be jarring, and we may feel helplessly adrift at first without having the comforting, normal rhythms of our lives to fall back on. Those who have confronted major adversities in their lives, especially health issues that may be life-threatening, understand. We are forced to change our lives and our lifestyles. For the rabbis, the desert, the wilderness, was actually a desirable place to be. Very different than what the English words perhaps imply. In our parlance, the words conjure images of desolation, Jill, desolation and helplessness. In the rabbi's view, however, the desert is a place where we can see more clearly, unencumbered by other distractions, Bob. The desert reflects freedom and uncluttered vision, allowing us to take stock of our lives and ourselves in an environment devoid of outside pressures. We don't always choose to go out into the wilderness. Ask anyone whose family was brutally affected by COVID over the last 2 years and lost loved ones. Anyone who has faced any kind of traumatic event in their lives thought they were doing really well, moving along, doing their thing, everything they were supposed to do. And then stuff happened. And it was what jarred us out of our homeostatic existence and forced us to, okay, what do I do now? I can't do this anymore. Which of these other 2 or 3 or 4 paths do I need to take in order to get through this mess, get through this wilderness? So for moderns, wilderness seems to be synonymous with chaos. What biblical setting is the opposite of that? And is that what we long for, where we long to return to? What's the biblical opposite of chaos?
Shalom.
A place.
Peace.
A hint. A place.
Gan Eden.
Gan Eden. Exactly. That's the ideal beginning where everything was in harmony and we were vegetarians and there was no animosity until the serpent showed up. One might argue that it was too calm, too peaceful, and the serpent had to go to shake things up a little bit and make people make some choices that they didn't have to make before. That's a conversation for a different time. But when we think about being in a wilderness of chaos, not a place where we go because it's beautiful and there's no distraction and we can wander and we can listen to our own thoughts or not. But if we think of wilderness as a place of unpredictability and fear, uncertainty, is it Gan Eden that we want to return to or not? If not, where? How do we think about what our goal is if we can get out of this morass we're in?
Want to get back to normal for ourselves. So, the goal is to get through these challenges and to get back to a homeostasis that
which is going to look
comfortable with for in the
individual. Which is going to look different from the one we had before. You understand? Whatever will become normal is the new normal. It's not going to be the old normal.
Right.
Okay. So there's no metaphoric future goal place that we're thinking of. We just, Jill.
Well, I challenge that what normal is, and I challenge that every day isn't different. So, I think that, yeah, we don't want to, I think maybe, I don't want to change somebody else's words, but for me, it would not be, I don't think I would say get back to normal, because I don't know what normal is. But for me, it would be getting out of the chaos of whatever that chaos is, and getting to a place where I feel more that I'm in control, or I'm in a place where it feels more I feel less helpless.
Okay, that's good. That's good, because I don't know if we are ever really completely in control of anything in our lives. But I think there's a point where we feel less helpless, where we feel the choices in front of us are manageable. There's 2 or 3 different choices, and they're all okay, as opposed to I have no clue what I'm doing, and there's no path, and I'm lost, and somebody give me a hand here. Good. That's a good insight, Jill. Thank you. But I guess what I'm looking for, and I don't know if there's an answer to this, if Gan Eden is the metaphoric, idealized place of perfection before chaos, there's really, this is very interesting, there's really no place we can describe as being the new place of perfection and lack of chaos until Yemot HaMashiach, until Mashiach comes and everybody's at peace. But that's not a place, it's time, I guess. But it doesn't sound as though we want to go back to Eden. It doesn't, because frankly, homeostasis can be really boring. And after having lived a life of, and this is very personal, having lived a life of good stuff and not good stuff and trauma and uncertainty and relocations and all kinds of stuff, I don't know if I could go back to a place where I sat on the ground and ate fruit all day. That doesn't seem to be an idealized place for me. And that's very personal. But let's be looking for the coming of Mashiach and at least a time of peace and a lack of gunfire. Okay, where are we? Okay, another understanding. Bamidbar represents an important stage in the journey of the people from slavery to freedom. The wilderness, far beyond its geographic or historic reality, enters the Jewish experience as a central metaphor for understanding who we are and what we must do. Completely different view of wilderness. The true goal of the Exodus was to take Egypt out of the Israelites. I love that. The experience of the seemingly endless journey transformed a people crushed, frightened, subservient, and dependent into a people with initiative, self-respect, anger at oppression, and even militancy. The Israelites at the Jordan are a very different people from the one that left Egypt. They are ready to fight their own battles. And it's almost the kind of the same change from the shtetl mentality of Eastern Europe to the Israeli mentality of, this is our land, this are our people, I'm Yisrael Chai, I will fight in my land for my homeland. Very different point of view. But Midbar reminds us that wherever we live, there is a better place, a world more attractive, a promised land. But the way to that land is through the wilderness. There is no way to get there except by joining together and marching day after day. My kids learned a game when they were in preschool I don't know if your kids or grandkids have come home with it, the bear hunt, where I'm going on a bear hunt, coming to the tall grass, can't go around it, can't go under it, can't go over it, gotta go through it. Come to the river, can't go around it, and so forth. The point being, when there's an obstruction in front of you, you gotta go through it. You've got to walk through it. If it's grief, you've got to walk through it. If it's uncertainty, you've got to walk through it to get to the other side. So, how is a promised land different from Eden? And you can think about what was necessary when they entered the land, what it's like living in the land. How is promised land different from Eden?
It gives you a target to shoot for. It gives you an objective.
Okay. And what about when you're already there?
How do you really know that you're already there?
Well, in reality,
It's all relative. It's all relative, right? Every day,
okay.
You look for a new promised land.
Okay. I'm thinking of the promised land. They crossed the river, they were in the land and they knew it. But
Okay.
You're right. How do we know, as we're slogging through our lives and slogging through the wilderness, how do we know we've arrived? It's a good question. Also,
It's your ability to be satisfied with your life, where it's at, and that again, that does not mean you don't want to improve and strive for more. But there is a lot to be said for being happy and satisfied with what you got. So even though you may not be in promised land, you kind of make it your promised land until you decide that you want to go for a new promised land.
Okay. I think there's the element of effort. I said a little while ago that if I were back in Gan Eden, I'd be bored out of my mind. Mm-hmm. And God put Adam and Eve in the garden, and God gave them tasks, till the land, pick the fruit, do your thing. But it was a peaceful existence. There wasn't struggle. Of course, there were only the two of them. The children haven't come along yet. Going to a promised land involves the effort to slog through the wilderness, first of all. And then second of all, once they were there, they had to fight to capture it. Okay, the whole book of Judges is about fighting to capture the land. It wasn't given to us in the sense that we could go in and settle empty cities and till farms that had been planted by somebody else, and there wasn't another person in the place. There were lots of people, and we had to conquer it. It took our commitment and our effort. And I think that's the difference between the promised land and Eden. And depending on one's point of view, and depending on one's, where are you in your life's journey, Eden might be much more appealing, but a place where you can, I have to apologize. This is the noisiest building I've ever lived in, so bear with me. Going to the promised land, if you're someone who really is tired of being passive and tired of being taken care of and tired of not knowing what your purpose in life is, thought of being proactive and having been given a challenge to move forward can be really attractive. So I think it probably depends on where you are, again, in your life's path. Okay. What can we learn? Final question. What can we learn from the notion of wandering in the wilderness? How did that, or will that, prepare us for Sinai? Because remember, Saturday night is the first night of Shavuot. We will stand at Sinai. And I used to like to remind my congregation that the Midrash says that no bird sang, no wind blew, the world was filled with silence, awaiting the voice of God. And we're going to be there again Saturday night. We have been theoretically preparing ourselves for the last 7 weeks, almost fully 7 weeks. What can we learn from the notion of wandering in the wilderness to prepare us to receive Torah once again? Oh,
I see, I see this promised land was a conditional promised land. And we had all these conditions that were placed upon us in order to possess the promised land.
okay.
And there was always a risk of us losing the promised land if we failed to follow. And I mean, that's the Torah is telling us all these instructions. And I think we are led to believe that the benefits are, if you do this, you're going to get that. I think it's a difficult concept for people who have experienced difficulties in their timeline and say, I don't understand why. And that's the chaos that I guess God put in the world as well, because could have made it a lot easier for everybody. If he just says, if you do this, there won't be a Holocaust. If you do this, there won't be any problems. No cancer, no diseases, no children dying, no gunfire, no nothing.
Yeah.
It's going to be great.
Yeah.
Eden was given to everyone. I mean, it was given to the two. And it was there. I mean, he placed them in that garden. He didn't do that for the promised land. He said, follow my rules. You got 40 years to learn them. You get into the land, got to try to, you're in charge. I'll be with you, so to speak, if you follow them, but I'm going to, you're going to be punished if you don't. And I'll have some prophets reminding you over the years, you'll hear from somebody saw what was going to happen 400 years from when they were born. And there's a lot to go on, but to me, I don't know if we're all striving for the promised land. That comes when they're saying Kaddish for me, because it's a lifetime struggle and a lifetime challenge for us to reach that promised land. So we're hopeful.
Okay, I thought I was done, but I'm not. I have the Sfat Emet and his interpreter, Rabbi Dr. Aaron Lieb Smokler. And I do want to try to share this with you. It's late. Okay. The book of Leviticus, which we just completed, concerned itself largely with order in the Mishkan. The book of Bamidbar opens this week with a concern for order around the Mishkan. The Israelites are arranged precisely on its perimeter and counted and tasked with specific jobs. Okay. To be part of the camp is to be part of its regimented array. It is therefore striking that a portion that spells out this degree of containment, Bamidbar, generates midrashim that accentuate lack of containment. The parsha begins, The parsha begins innocuously enough. Adonai spoke to Moses in the desert, in the Sinai desert. Note the word desert, in the tent of meeting, on the first day of the second month in the second year after the exodus from the land of Egypt, saying, the desert needed to be mentioned at the start of the book because the desert was essential to the word of God that followed. It was not merely a spatial designation, it communicated meaning. Hamidbar midaber, the desert speaks, claim the Hebrew poets, and so claims the Midrash. The Torah needed to unfold in the context of a midbar because Torah rests on the experience of hefkerut that only a desert can deliver so palpably. What is Hefkerut? The very opposite of tidy order. It is ownerlessness, wilderness, unruliness. It is radical openness, uncontrolled and untamed. It is total vulnerability, exposed and raw. Being in the desert with its vast expanses, blazing sun, magnificent quiet, scant water, and timeless landscapes generates all of these experiences. In the midst of unending sands, one can feel one's smallness bump up against the grandeur of eternity. Emphasis on the smallness. In that space, one can become uncannily receptive. One might begin to hear the voice of God. So render yourself hefker, says the Midrash, in order to receive Torah. Open yourself widely. Detach yourself from those things that tether you and tame you. Become ownerless. Give yourself over to the wilderness, for you just might then find yourself back at Sinai. The path to order is paved through disorder. Okay. So for the Sfat Emet, Hefkerut also contains yet another valence. The Torah represents the wholeness, shlemut, of created beings, and to the degree that they are lacking in their own eyes, they will yearn for their wholeness. To the degree that they are lacking, better to the degree that they are perceived to lack. They will merit Torah. It is very hard for conscious beings to see themselves as deficient, as we must. But one who makes oneself like a desert gains this insight. As it says in the Midrash, one cannot merit Torah without first becoming ownerless, hefker, like the desert. This was the preparation of the Jewish people before they received the Torah, that they arrived at this attribute of desertness, that it became clear to them that they needed to yearn for wholeness, to clarify this need for others. The desert experience is one of thirst, of recognizing that we do not contain within ourselves all that we need to survive and thrive. It highlights our dependence, our need to look outward and upward to complete ourselves. Becoming hefker is becoming aware of this essential human insufficiency. Think about being hungry. Your body tells you you need some fuel for your engine. You can't just regenerate it. You've got to go and get it. You are insufficient. For the Sfat Emet, this awareness is an elemental part of the spiritual life, which is a striving for wholeness. It all begins with desire. In order to arrive at shlemut, one must recognize that one is not yet whole. In order to get filled up, one must behold the ways in which one is written with holes. The Torah offers a path toward completeness, but it can be received only by those who can see how very incomplete they are. This is what the Midbar was all about, becoming conscious of thirst so that it might be quenched by the waters of Torah. The path might be long, 40 years long, and circuitous, but this is what it takes, liknot et haTorah, to acquire Torah, to actively acquire wisdom. We stand now on the cusp of Shavuot during the days of preparation for revelation. How might we prepare for Sinai? Enter Midbar Sinai, our Parsha enjoins us. Notice how very imperfect we are and how very needful. Tap into our core deficiencies. Recognize that Torah is a process of both unbuilding and upbuilding, and that wholeness, shlemut, comes only to those who really yearn for it. Okay, I have 2 minutes. Can I do this? I can do this. First of all, hi, Rachel. First of all, I want to remind you of a book that was written, decades ago by, and I've forgotten her name. Oh my gosh, another brain cell just died. Ariana Huffington, The Fourth Instinct. And she talks about the instinct to feed ourselves, to procreate, to move about. There are certain things that are built into our being alive. And she said the fourth instinct is the one that seeks to connect with something beyond ourselves. And that is the series of holes within us that that Rabbi Smokler was talking about, that until we recognize that there are insufficiencies within us, we can't address them. And Rabbi Klotz closes this conversation with, this week's teaching invites us to practice letting go of the domesticated certainties we hold to and own as known entities we inherit or acquire. In the silence and openness, empty of our knowing, we are better prepared to receive the revelatory transmissions offered us on Shavuot. The Midbar, in a stark desert ecosystem, we can palpably come up against the limits of our capacity to control and tame, because there's precious little we really can control. When in an unfamiliar and harsh environment like a desert, when in an unfamiliar and harsh environment like a desert, we come to the edges of what we know is familiar. And in the uncertainty and unpredictability of that environment, we can quickly see the reality of Hefkerut. We are limited. Our very lives are dependent upon fundamental necessities such as water, livable ranges of heat and cold temperatures, food, and our sensory capacities to receive fresh input from moment to moment. Yet, we don't have to trek to a desert to practice Hefkerut. If you have fallen ill with an acute or chronic illness, or you are experiencing changes in hearing, vision, memory, balance, or perhaps you experience your gender or sexual orientation as different from heteronormative binaries, but for a few examples, you might sense vaguely and quite concretely that your body is not your own to control, curate, or domesticate. You have agency in your response to such forces, but you don't innately dominate them, at least in the long run. So, final question. What spiritual practice might we explore these last few days before Shavuot to prepare for receiving Torah? Is there some sort of way that we can start each morning or go to sleep at night, some sort of thought process, a walk in the backyard? What might we do to encourage a sense of Hefkerut, humility, acknowledging what we lack before we receive Torah next Saturday night?
I can't think of a spiritual practice per se, but I thought I was having, I just want to say first, Torah Rabba Nyashka, Rabbi Cohen, I was listening in the car as I was getting to where I could set up Zoom, but and all the other comments, I guess I was thinking with the things that were mentioned, while yes, this idea that we don't own ourselves and we can empty, etc. I feel like there is still something very valuable about the community, about Minyan. And I guess is partly why that was so, or is so critical within Judaism, because I guess I'd say for me, I really realized my own hunger and thirst. And I loved what you said about that we can't replenish our own hunger, or excuse me, our own nourishment. I was like, oh my gosh, I never thought of it like that. But that's literally.
And that is very humbling. If we depend on our own bodies to regenerate, we die of hunger.
Yeah.
Or thirst or whatever.
Yeah.
So.
But I was like, the community I experienced when I got to be in person with you all, it just like really filled me. And that's why I'm like hungering and striving to have that again and more, because I haven't been having it. So yeah.
So you're acknowledging your own personal lack and hunger. Yeah. And that can prepare you for Shavuot probably by tuning into the service online and experiencing it as limited as it is because it's online.
Yeah.
But sure, good. I have not spent a whole lot of time myself thinking about this. What I do want to leave you with, did anybody else have a thought before I close? What I do want to leave you with I've been struggling with the whole notion of sphera. Because when we teach it to Hebrew school kids, we always say, well, you count down to your birthday or you count down to the last day of school, but we don't count down, we count up. And so those parallels never held water for me until I started thinking about pregnancy. I'm not pregnant. When we talk about pregnancy, we don't say, I'm going to deliver in 2 months, I'm going to deliver in 1 month, because we don't know. We're going to deliver when the baby says it's time. We count upward. I'm 2 months pregnant, 3 months pregnant, 39 weeks pregnant. And I think that is the more of the parallel. I am 1 month prepared to receive Torah, but I still have a long way to go. I have 2 months. I'm 2 months prepared. I am 47 days prepared to receive Torah. And that, I think, it's a little late for this year, but next year, perhaps we should be thinking about, as we go through counting every night, how am I more prepared today than I was yesterday? When we reach the point where we say making 1 week, making 2 weeks, how have I prepared myself more this past week than before so that I can continue with next week? Because it is a forward progression to Shavuot. It's not a counting down, it's a counting up. So let's think about, how am I more ready now than I was before? And in the 2 or 3 days that are before us, how am I more ready each day than I was the day before? How have I diminished my ego more? How have I recognized my lacks more that I cannot myself heal? How have I recognized more that I need the wisdom of Torah and the direction of Torah, and therefore be more grateful Saturday night than I might have been yesterday? I look forward to seeing you online. May you have a wonderful celebratory Shavuot, study well Saturday night, and an early Shabbat Shalom. And it was a pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Yeshua.
Yes, and yes, Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom. And we'll see you on Saturday night, maybe.
Yeah, hopefully. Thank you for your kind words.